Today we are continuing with our series, Running in Circles. And my first competitive race was the Montgomery Half Marathon in 2011. Somebody asked me, do you want to run the Montgomery Half? And I thought the Montgomery Half Mile, sure. But no, it is a little bit unusual that your first race would be 13.1 miles, I guess outside of back in PE days when we would run races in school and high school and middle school. But I learned that you can't just roll out of bed and run 13.1 miles, that you have to train for it. I had some friends who were runners and who sort of were informal coaches to me. I printed out the guide, the Montgomery Half Marathon. When you signed up, they had a training guide where you run 5 days a week. So I went not from running at all to running 5 days a week. I never would run 5 days a week if there wasn't a manual that said this is what you're supposed to do. But you run 5 days, and then Saturday is the big race, the big training day, because the race is going to be on a Saturday. So you run like 4 miles the first week, and then 5 miles the second week. It's about 2 or 3 months to where you're preparing to run the half marathon. So I discovered that I could do it. I ran 5 days a week, and it was kind of exciting. I was to get up and run first thing, gave you some energy to start the day. But as the weeks wore on, I wasn't as successful in running the long distances, especially the last couple of weeks beforehand. You're supposed to run like 8 or 9 miles, and I think 10 miles the Saturday beforehand. And so when the time came for race day, I was emailing all my friends and saying, please pray. Please pray for me. You think about running a marathon, half marathon, you need prayers, but I needed them. And I also discovered that when I trained, I ran around the neighborhood where I lived. There was a lot of streets and just different areas where I could run. And so I had an app that I wore on my arm. You can actually see it here in this particular photo that I wore. And it tracked how many miles you were running, so I could check and see how far I was running. And I discovered on race day that the app was off. That I wasn't running as far as I thought that I was running. In fact, after I finished the race, it said 14.5 miles. I mean, it was a pretty good bit off. And so about mile 10 of the Montgomery Half Marathon, I was running there. You run up a hill, you cross Court Street, it goes over the interstate, and you come down into downtown Montgomery. And I don't remember a lot after that. But I do remember there were some people who I knew who were running alongside of me and really encouraged me and helped me in that time. I did have to stop and walk a couple of times after I crossed that Court Street Bridge coming on down into downtown Montgomery. But I made it, okay? This picture was taken just before ran back into the Biscuit Stadium, which is where we wound up there inside the Biscuit Stadium, there, Riverwalk Stadium. And while it looks like I'm doing really well here, it looks like this is right before I went into the stadium. This is what I was feeling on the inside. We have a clip here.
I can't feel my legs.
That's what I was saying on the inside while I was running into the stadium. But I finished. I ran about a 10-minute mile for, it was a little over, a few seconds over that. I think I was in like the 50 or 55th percentile. They published all the runners in the Montgomery Advertiser. So everybody was like, that's really good for your first race. You did really well. And I said, thank you so much. And I said, but now what you need to do is train for a marathon. And go for the full thing. And so you need to go run next week and keep your legs all loose and everything. And again, I can't feel my legs, but I could feel them by then. But I decided to go and run to try to follow that advice, and I got like a half mile, and I just quit. I'm like, nope. I'm not going to have hip surgery when I'm 40. So I went back home, and I have never run since. But I did finish the Montgomery Half Marathon. I got out of it what I put into it, which wasn't a whole lot. But I would have gotten so much more. If I would have trained with a partner. If I'd had a real mentor, real coach, which I had friends who were better runners than me who were encouraging me and giving me advice. It's all about the shoes, and keep yourself hydrated and all that kind of stuff. But I would have done so much better if I'd had a partner. If I'd had a friend that I ran with, that way at least I could have figured out that the app was off, okay? And that's true in the races that we run, the competitive races, and it's true in the race of life too. That how well you run depends on who you run with. How well you run depends upon who you run with. What coaches, what mentors, what friends that you are running with, in what circles that you're running. A few years ago, I preached a series. 3 years ago, it was a Life Church series. Craig Groeschel, pastor of Life Church, it was called Friending. Some of you may or may not remember that series, but the tagline of that series came from Craig Groeschel. Some of you may remember this, some if you weren't here, but this is it. This, show me your friends, and I'll show you your future. In other words, show me who you run with, who you hang out with, and I'll show you where you're going. Not only where you're going, I can give a pretty good idea about where you're going to wind up based on the character, the habits, the type of people that you are running with. That's why choosing your friends might be the most important choice that you make in your life, maybe. Might be one of the most important that you make. And that's one thing that what we do here at Mulder is that everything in our Connect, Grow, Serve model of ministry, everything is based around finding friends, finding coaches, mentors, those who are going to encourage us to run our spiritual race well. Because we're running a race of life together. And it's not a sprint. It's not something you're just going to get out there and run one day and it's done. No, this is a marathon. It's day after day, week after week, month after month. And if all you're depending upon is yourself, if your choice of religion is privatized religion, where I go to the park every day on Sunday morning, or I go to the golf course, or I go to the beach, or I go to the woods, and that's where I find God, is out there by myself. That's where I have my connection, my worship time is out by myself. And I'm not going to deny that. Some people, you may have a real connection with God having that kind of experience. But how are you going to know if your app is off if all you're depending upon is your own privatized religion? Some people say, I don't like organized religion. If they say that, you can always say, hey, it's okay because we're really not that organized. We're really not. But privatized religion, hey, if all you're depending upon, all you want to put in is just what you've got yourself, you're only going to get so far. You're not equipping yourself to run the marathon that is this spiritual race that you're in, and especially to equip you and to help prepare you for seasons where you're confused, where you don't know which way is up, where you're going through a struggle, through a hard time. It's in those seasons that you need a friend. And that's what the Connect, Grow, Serve model of ministry is like. Because I know that for every season of my life, or for every major decision of my life, I look back over, especially the turning points in my life, that a big reason I made those decisions in those times that I was trying to pursue God's call and follow God's call, a lot of those decisions were made in the context, all of them were made in the context of the people that I was running with. And I wouldn't be where I am today, I wouldn't be doing what I am today if it weren't for the friends that I made along the way, the people that I believe that God put into my path. When I graduated high school, I was going off to college. I went to a university that was away from my hometown. And so I'd be moving away and was looking for roommates. And there were some guys that I played ball with growing up, and they were looking for a roommate, and they had like a 4-bedroom apartment, and they needed a 4th person. And they were looking at me possibly to go. And I knew those guys. I grew up with those guys, and it would have been fine probably, but just didn't feel good about that situation. There were some habits there, and some just didn't really. Basically, my mom said, "You're not living with them." I mean, that's really what it came down to. But so I've had a different group of friends that I made in college. So I had a totally new group of friends. So some of the ways that's intimidating to kind of start over. You don't know people, and that's kind of scary. But eventually, we became really close. And one of those guys was a Christian, was a deeply committed Christian. Now, me and the guys I roomed with, we were kind of nominal Christians. We got there to campus, and I got a letter from the Wesley Foundation, which is kind of the campus Methodist organization, and inviting, because I grew up in the United Methodist, I was at Abbeville United Methodist Church, and my roommates, they grew up at Covenant United Methodist Church in Dothan. And so I was like, yeah, great, here's this Wesley Foundation. So we put it on the refrigerator, and that's where it stayed. We never went. But one of our friends was very involved in Campus Crusade and had really had just a powerful experience with Christ. And he was inviting us to go, and so I went one time, and they had, this was back in the mid-'90s, okay, and they had guitars, and I had not experienced music like this before, because I grew up, my church had an organ and a choir that wore robes, and they had guitars, and they had an overhead projector. Okay, this is before the days where we got these newfangled things now. This is project. You put an overhead, you put the words on an overhead projector, and then you pull them off, or you slide. Somebody's there to slide it. Somebody's up there by it and to pull it off. This was very high tech back in those days. But they really loved to sing the songs. They were clapping and would say, "We're so happy to see you." And I was just freaked out right immediately and didn't go back for at least a year. But in the process, when I did decide to go back, which was actually because I'd kind of reached a difficult place in my life, and college can be a challenge, and I went back and I found that through these friends that I made, I discovered that they had a relationship with Jesus Christ that was real. And they had something that I wanted desperately to have. They had passion for Him. They wanted other people to know about Him. And there was something in them that I wanted for myself. And so in the process, I had the Bible started open. I had read all the way through the Bible when I was like in junior high school. I grew up in church, okay? I was the church kid. But in a new way, because of these people I was hanging out with, the Bible was opened up to me in ways never before. All of a sudden, it started making sense. Things that hadn't clicked before started clicking for me. And there was a group of guys, there were 4 or 5 of us, who would get together, and we had a time where we actually had like 3 days of fasting. That was another kind of like run the half marathon deal. I did it one time. I did it 3 days where I didn't have solid food, and I did that in college. And that's kind of like in college, you're crazy to do stuff, but people do fast like that, sometimes longer than that. But that was the longest fast I've ever been a part of. But a small group of us held each other accountable for that. And there were guys in my group of 4 or 5 guys that confessed to things, to sins, that I had never heard confessed to, or somebody confessed out loud that they struggled with that. I mean, it was inspiring to me that I said, I want to have a desire for holiness. I want to hate sin as much as that guy. I want to be pursuing after Christ and want to run my race well as much as this guy who's willing to be humiliated in my eyes to confess to a sin that none of the rest of us had courage enough to confess to. That I want to love Jesus enough that I'm not afraid to be humiliated in the presence of my friends, that I might know Him and love Him better. So it was a small group of us. We started meeting in our duplex there and studying the Bible together. And even though I didn't know a lot about the Bible that time, I kind of helped to lead that my last year on campus, and was actually leading a prayer ministry my last quarter at Auburn. And it just so happened that Mara was in that group. She was like one of those. That's why when I came to Mulder, I was like, Mara, do I know you? Have I ever seen you before? It was like 15 years ago. But that was way back in college days. And it was from that group of friends, there were relationships that helped me through other seasons of my life. 10 years after I left college, I was in a season where I was kind of aimless. I was feeling restless. I was feeling discouraged. I wasn't sure what God was calling me to do. And there was a friend who met me for breakfast every Wednesday morning at McDonald's. And it was the same kind of deal. We confessed sin. We held each other accountable, and we talked about what was discouraging. And he was not a pastor. He worked construction, which was so cool. Which was here's this guy, which is kind of cool, because sometimes when pastors get together, we can say, well, I had 100, I had 150. I mean, some pastors can be like that, sometimes. And so that was really cool, and that helped me to discern a change in my life. Actually, at that time I was leaving a church in Dothan to move up to this area. And then after I came to Prattville, I did find a pastor friend who I met for breakfast also every Wednesday morning. And he was pastor of Robinson Springs and Millbrook, Chris Perry. And we met for breakfast every Wednesday morning. And that was a discouraging time at times. I was in my mid-30s at this time. I was wondering if I was ever going to get married. Here I am single and discouraged. And just to have that friend that was there to encourage me, to hold me accountable, And when I met Molly and started dating Molly and started getting a little bit afraid about the big step of marriage coming up, he's like, do it, man. What's wrong with you? You know, somebody just to challenge you and say, listen, wake up. Somebody say, your app is off. This is what you've been waiting for. A friend at every step in the journey. You see, and even today, like I always have a group that I meet with, sometimes more than one, for purposes of helping to encourage each other along the way. See, we do that because your race, this race of life is too important. It's too important to run alone. And this race that you're running, when I ran the Montgomery Half, we got this little award here, and it's pretty nice. I was pretty impressed with this medal that I got for finishing the race. I hang it up on my TV as a reminder of what I did. That one time I ran 13 miles, and that I will never do it again in my life. So it's right there. But we're running a race for an even better prize. Paul talks about this in the first letter to the Corinthians, beginning in chapter 9. He said, do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? See, Paul loved to use examples from athletics and sports in his letters. He has some examples like that, which that was something that was important in that particular part of the world. In Corinth, to the people where he writes this letter, there was a particular type of games that were held every 2 years. They were called the Isthmian Games, which were second only to the Olympian Games in ancient Greece in their importance. The Olympics played every 4 years back in those days, just like they do today. And the Isthmian Games were in Corinth every 2 years, and they had racing. They also had boxing. And so Paul uses those examples from athletics in his letters. And it's just too bad that we don't care anything about athletics around here. But so he uses this example. He says, run in such a way as to get the prize. Be intentional in the race. You want to win. Why would a runner run unless they want to win the race, at least to finish the race? So run in such a way as to get the prize. Verse 25. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. You wouldn't compete if you weren't trained, if you weren't prepared, at least if you were wise, unless you're just incredibly talented. But even the incredibly talented still compete. They do it to get a crown that will not last. Okay? In the Isthmian Games, they had wreaths that they would give to the winners. In the Olympian Games, they would get those wreaths would be made of olive leaves. But in the Isthmian Games, they were made of pine leaves usually, or sometimes of even some type of celery. So they would not last. That would be your wreath. And maybe you could put it in some kind of a dried location where it might last throughout your lifetime, but it's not going to last. But we are running. We are competing for a crown that will last forever. For something that is enduring. And I'm not just talking about some precious metal here, gold and silver, like you're going to be wearing a crown around in forever, you know, when all things are restored, we'll all be ready. No, something even more wonderful than that. Something even longer lasting. Verse 26. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. Not from here or there. No, a purpose. If you're going to win, you have to train with a purpose. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. You see, they had this particular means of training called shadow boxing, where you would box your shadow, and it would help you to have the techniques and the moves down for boxing. They had boxing back in those days. It was a little different than ours. They had gloves where the knuckles were exposed. They had a type of wrestling where you could do anything except gouge the person's eye out, or biting. Maybe biting wasn't allowed. But so it was pretty rough, you know. But he says, I don't train like shadow boxing. Maybe there's some value in that, but if you really want to get ready to box, pretty cool that Paul used a boxing analogy. But if you really want to be trained to box, you got to train with another boxer. You got to train with a real person there. I'm not going to fight like someone beating the air. No. Verse 27. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. So I see the need myself. I'm disciplining myself. I'm training myself to run this race with strength. And so that's why I need other people. That's why I need a live person to hold me accountable, to call me out, to help me tell me when my app is wrong. And that's what you're there for them too as well. So you will not be disqualified for the prize. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 17 describes this principle. It says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. You're stronger together. If your priorities are the same, if you're reaching toward the same goal, you're aiming in the same direction, you are stronger with a coach, a mentor, a friend than you ever would be alone. Maybe we could say it like this. Running in the right circles, that is, the right circle of friends, can reinforce the right choices. In what direction are those friends influencing you? And this is one reason why we emphasize here at Mulder is that circle. Getting in the circle. Where you're not sitting in rows like you're sitting in a row right now and hope you're either bored out of your mind or maybe you're somewhat interested or intrigued or you want to see another picture of me running, But you're sitting in a row and there's no interaction. It's all one-way communication. But when you're in a circle, you can't hide. I mean, you could sit there and not say anything and not participate, but you would be kind of stuck in the mud now, wouldn't you? It would not be very polite to all those other people. That's why you're afraid to go, because I'm afraid to be vulnerable. I'm afraid to open up. I'm afraid to talk about what I'm really struggling with, what's really going on in my life. It's so much easier to talk about politics or the football game. Let's talk about something else than to talk about what's going on with me and with my walk with Jesus Christ. You're afraid of it. I mean, just admit it. I was. That's why I didn't go back after a year after seeing those freaky Christians at Campus Crusade. But if you want to make the right choices, if you want to fulfill your purpose as somebody made in the image of God, and to follow God's call on your life, it's going to be about getting in circles, because circles are better than rows. Circles are better than rows. Circles are better than rows. Say it with me. Circles are better than rows. We connect in a row. Maybe that's where you started and you came to church, but we grow in a circle. See, as we get older, friendships become more of a challenge, or at least I've discovered that. When you're in college, when my college experience, I was at a university town, and we had a group of friends, and this is what's so cool about college. You don't even have to knock on the door. They just come in, burst in, hey, what's up, man? Sit down on the couch. I don't care if you're studying, need a test. Let's go get pizza. Just that kind of deal. But as you get older, we get more set in our ways, and we get in a routine. And we're tired. Especially if you're raising kids. You come home from work, and you got your wife or your husband there, and you got, or maybe you're still single. But even if you're single, we still get into the ruts into our lives, and it becomes a challenge. See, friendships require effort, especially as we get older and we get set into our routines. So if you're going to find a circle of friends to help you on the road to maturity in Christ so you can win the prize, you're going to have to be intentional. Just like Paul says, I'm not going to fight aimlessly. I'm going to be purposeful. It's going to require intentionality to get together when there's so many other things you could be doing. Friendships require effort, but they're worth it. They're worth it when you're going through that season where you don't know which way to go. They're worth it through those seasons where you're struggling and you feel alone, and that you should invest in them in those seasons when you don't feel that way is all the more emphasis to be prepared for when those times do come. Molly is a part of a grow group that meets on Thursday mornings, and it's such a valuable time for her, being a stay-at-home mom and married to an introverted pastor husband. That's very important for her because she's with kids all the time, and just to be able to be with a group of friends and to talk about what's going on, to open up, it's just, she looks forward to that. It is life to her, life-giving to her. And starting this fall, she's actually going to be facilitating her group. She's going to be leading them. She's picking the book they're going to read together, and so she's so excited about that. Knowing this is the way my wife worked. She started preparing in May for her to be leading this group in August. So you may find that place, or you may be frustrated that you can't find that circle for you. Well, if that's the case, and this might be more of intimidating, especially if you're not further along, but you could, there's the only thing better than being a part of a group, the only thing better than that, being a part of a circle like this, is leading one, facilitating one. Now, I did in college, and I didn't know anything. I mean, I didn't know anything in college, but it was a part, because the only thing that's more fun than yourself growing is to be a part of other people and to see them growing in their faith. Just this past year, Claude and Deborah Johns, who are new members of our church, they started a group for parents of unique kids with unique needs. They saw that as a need, and that's part of their experience. And that started meeting on Wednesday night. And they just started with like 1 or 2 people. But now there's like 7 or 8 a year later. And this month, they're starting a group called Mosaics for kids with unique needs, unique kids. It's going to be meeting during the 11 o'clock hour, our first 11 o'clock grow group. We've got 9:30 groups galore, Sunday school classes meeting. This will be our first 11 o'clock group meeting on Sunday mornings. And it may start small, but it's already got some potential participants. You're going to be able to hear more about how to get involved in that next week. Here's a story of one of our newer groups that started up in the last year, the Pure Joy group.
I'm Heather Burge.
And I'm Jason Burge.
We got involved with a small group because we attended one of the Connect classes at Mulder. So after the Connect class was finished, Michelle invited us all over to her house for a lunch so we could all talk, get to know each other a little bit better. And we were able to meet Joe and Heather Perlick. Joe came in and he was so excited about this new small group and the opportunity. And he said, I just want to get a group of people together who will just, do life with each other, encourage each other, pray for each other.
We really wanted to connect with other couples who were like in our age group, who had children.
It is us and 3 other couples, and we call it #PureJoy.
#PureJoy. It was kind of like me and Heather's like life verse is James 1 and 2. It's, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds, because the testing of your faith will produce perseverance. And it really represents the fact that that's part of what our group is for, is to help each other through those times when we need a little extra help.
I feel like I've grown much, much stronger in my faith. We have been through some trials. My dad was actually really, really sick last year. And my small group was there. They prayed. It's very encouraging, very uplifting when somebody texts you and says, hey, just checking in. I wanted to pray for you, or, letting you know I'm thinking about you. And that was a hard time, but I feel like the small group really helped when we went through that.
I think even for us though, because we've been going through a hard time in our family, and it's been a place that we could go to and ask for help and ask for prayer. It's just nice to know that you have a support group behind you through your really great times, but even through your darkest times too.
I can say that we have established some pretty solid friendships with the couples in our small group.
I know that there have been some relationships that have made that last a lifetime, even through our kids see each other in the hall and they know each other. I know that I probably drive the girls nuts with all my texts throughout the week.
I just got a text from #PureJoy Heather Brown Perlick, who said, "What are you doing?"
In the early 1800s, late 1700s, scholars think that the reason that England didn't have the kind of violent revolution that happened in France, where there were people getting their heads cut off, guillotines, Bastille, all that stuff. Scholars think the reason that didn't happen in England, which had the same kind of economic conditions, vast difference between rich and poor, there was a king, there was social injustices that were happening, but people think the reason that didn't happen in England was because of the Methodist revival. That literally hundreds of thousands of people came to faith in Christ under the ministry of the Methodists and of John Wesley, who started that movement. And the reason that hundreds of thousands of people came to faith and that it ultimately changed the country to where there were social reforms that happened in the early 1800s, there was slavery was abolished, there were other social reforms. The reason that happened, it wasn't because John Wesley was such a dynamic preacher. It was because he required every Methodist, every person who became a member of the Methodist societies, they had to be a part of a small group, where every week they sat around a circle and somebody asked them about how their week had gone and specifically held them accountable to their walk in Christ. And ultimately, that revival spread from England to America. And Methodist circuit riders traveled all over the early frontier where most people weren't churched. And they led thousands to Christ. The Methodist Church became the largest church in the early part of the history of America and changed the story of the United States. So don't ever treat trivially meeting together once a week to ask someone how they're doing and how they're doing in their relationship with God. Even on those weeks where it seems frustrating, that maybe it felt like you haven't had a great meeting and maybe you had small attendance and people didn't really share, don't ever take it for granted. Because what you're doing is that you're ensuring together that you run with strength to win the prize. And what you may discover is that as you run, you discover that God is running with you.